Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dribble Drive podcast, episode number 30. As we head toward the new year, Austin Render, your host, with you here. Thanks so much for joining us. If you are watching us live on the YouTube channel, the Back Home Network YouTube channel, that's the podcast network we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel. You can catch us out on the YouTube channel live. You can also get us in podcast form if that's how you're listening. Thanks so much for joining us. Hit that subscribe button, download the episodes, give us ratings. All that stuff helps us make the product better for you. Happy holidays to everybody. If you're listening to this live, it's a couple of days before Christmas. If you're listening to us as you travel through your Christmas traveling plans, we appreciate you making us a part of your holiday season. The Big Ten basketball season is about to go full steam ahead here starting this weekend. We're going to have Big Ten conference games basically the rest of the season. So we'll certainly get into that as the episode goes on. We're also going to be joined by Dave Marcus, the voice of the UCLA Bruins. He's going to join us to talk about the number one team in the country, who's sitting at 12-0 right now, heading into conference play. Lots of stuff to get to this week. But we do want to start the show with some very sad news. We learned earlier this week that Jamie Cavey Lang, the former color commentator for Iowa women's basketball, has passed away at the age of 41. We want to send our condolences to her family, to the Iowa Hawkeye Radio Network, to the Iowa women's basketball program, to the Iowa program and athletic department just as a whole. We want to send our condolences for that. So we certainly wanted to make sure we started our show there. We're going to get throughout this show here today. We should get a drop of the AP poll at some point here. So we'll try and get that to you fresh off the presses. We will normally put our shows out on Tuesdays at noon, and that will continue next week for New Year's Eve. But because of Christmas Eve and all the scheduling and traveling, my family will be traveling on Christmas Eve, so I wanted to get this episode out a day early, but we'll go back to our Tuesdays at noon next week. Let's talk about other things going on right now. Big Ten standings as we head into the Big Ten season. There are 9 teams 1-0. There are 9 teams 0-1. We're going to get a lot of 1-0 matchups this weekend, a lot of 0-1, which we're going to get detail later in the show. Your undefeated teams in conference play: UCLA, USC, Maryland, Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Indiana. You're going to get Wisconsin and Indiana playing each other. Michigan State and Maryland are going to play each other this week. So some good matchups in this opening weekend of resumption of Big Ten play. Iowa announced it will retire Caitlin Clark's jersey on 2/2/25. Of course, her number 22. That's February 2nd when they host Juju Watkins and USC. So if that day needed to be any bigger, it's now the Caitlin Clark jersey retirement day. Some injury news around the conference, and I'm certainly probably missing some, but Lauren Betts is out right now for UCLA. We'll talk with Dave Marcus about that in a moment. She was injured a couple of games ago, did not play in their resounding win over Creighton. Makaira Cook is still out for Illinois, and Sydney Parrish returned for Indiana, scored 11 points, knocked down 3 threes in Indiana's win over Oakland on Sunday. So good to see her back out there for the Hoosiers. Well, let's talk about our game of the week here. And the game of the week was the one in Storrs, Connecticut. Number 7 USC goes on the road and knocks off number 4 UConn 72-70. Got to watch a good portion of this one. And early on, USC was the dominant presence. They opened up a double-digit lead. They led by 13 at the half. They were scoring at will. The three-point shots were falling. That's one of the big things in this game that I thought is going to stand out, maybe hopefully carry over for the Trojans, is the way they were able to knock down the three ball. They've struggled this season from beyond the arc. They were 9 of 16 in this game from the three-point line. That is a 56% clip. Juju Watkins, 25 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. She was our player of the week here on the Dribble Drive podcast because it's not much more meaningful than putting up 25 points on the road against the number 4 team in the country. Kiki Iriafen also had a double-double, 16 points, 11 rebounds. UConn made that huge surge in the second half, though, and this was a ton of fun coming down the stretch. Rhea Marshall provided the go-ahead bucket late in the fourth quarter that ultimately gave them the lead. They would not surrender. And this is now 12 games for USC. They're 11-1. All 12 games have featured double-digit points from both Iriafen and Juju Watkins, who have been terrific so far in their tag team efforts for USC as they get a monster win. Now 11-1 of the year. They've lost at home to Notre Dame. They go on the road and beat UConn and now head into conference play with a nice win under their belt. And again, we're going to keep an eye on if we get an AP poll release here during our broadcast, because we should at some point here get that, and then we will have see where I'm curious where USC goes. Sitting at number 7, they beat number 4. I would imagine they're going to jump inside the top 5. We'll get you that as soon as we have it hot off the presses. But a very impressive performance by USC. Juju Watkins. It should not be one of the things that are tough when you have a player like Juju, when you had a player last year like Caitlin Clark, Paige Beckers. It should not be swept under the rug when she's scoring 25 points in a game like this. And I think for me, it's easy when I'm trying to pick players of the week in the conference. It's easy to say, oh, this person doesn't normally do that, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think at some points that's fine. Obviously, the player of the year down the road, that's a different story. But it should not be swept under the rug and just ignored. Oh, another 25-point game for Juju Watkins. That's what she normally does. That's really darn impressive. And to do it on the road against Gino Auriemma's UConn team is extremely impressive. And there should be no batting eyelashes at that performance by Juju Watkins. And Kiki Iriafen, again, double-doubles are not that common. I mean, it's worth celebrating when you get a double-double. And Kiki Iriafen just keeps churning them out in big moments. And boy, is it nice to have those two to rely on for Lindsay Gottlieb and USC, who again get a big win over UConn. Final score 72-70 in that one. The team of the week is the UCLA Bruins, and we're going to get into UCLA a little bit more here as this episode goes on when Dave Marcus joins us here in a couple of minutes. But UCLA gets a really resounding win over Creighton, 70-41. They jumped out 26-4 in the first quarter. Just blitzed it. Game over. Done. We'll pack our bags. Let's go home. Don't need to watch any more of this one, which as an 11 p.m. Eastern time start was helpful. But that was just everything going the way of UCLA. And that was without Lauren Betts, who was hurt a couple of games ago with a leg injury. Corey Close did offer a little bit into that for her injury. Lauren, this is a quote from Corey Close, quote, "Lauren is not in a serious situation, so we're hoping to get her back very soon," end quote. So they are hopeful that that's not a long-term situation for Lauren Betts, but what a dominant performance, and we'll touch on it here in a moment. But the other game in that Invisalign Bay Area Women's Classic was Ohio State and Stanford. And the Buckeyes put it down on Stanford as well, 84-59. Ohio State remains undefeated at 12-0 in the season. And there's kind of been that question, how tough has Ohio State's non-con been? They have that great road win at Belmont, a pesky mid-major team. They proved it, I thought, in their really, really good performance at home against Illinois. There's no doubts this team is for real. And they go out to the Bay Area, not a home game for Stanford, but essentially a home game in terms of travel. And they go out there and they pummel the Cardinal. A really impressive performance from Ohio State. They held a very good Stanford three-point shooting team to 2 of 16. They forced 19 Stanford turnovers, only 6 Ohio State turnovers. Cody McMahon, 16 points. Madison Green, 15 points. Gray, Petty, Theory, and Watson all in double figures. That's what's going to make this team so difficult, is that they can attack you in so many different ways. And that's not even, I mean, a name not mentioned in there is the talented freshman Cambridge, who did not have double figures in this one, but we know what she's capable of. So there's so much on this Ohio State roster to like, and they are certainly going to be a team that's going to have opponents' hands full with how many ways they can attack you. And if they're going to take care of the basketball like that, only 6 turnovers, you're going to be tough to beat. And they proved that against that Stanford team. Again, that was in the Invisalign Bay Area Women's Classic. It was a doubleheader. Ohio State knocks off Stanford and UCLA over Creighton. A couple of results that didn't go Big Ten teams' ways. We saw the first loss of the season for Michigan State after a program best 11-0 start. They fall to Alabama 82-67. 25 turnovers to just 9 assists in this game for Michigan State. They were 3 of 13 from the three-point line. Really struggled against Montana in that same event the day before, too, from beyond the arc. So Michigan State falls for the first time. They will have a big one at Maryland this weekend. Michigan lost to Oklahoma in the Jumpman Classic, 72-62. Again, low assists, big turnovers. 7 assists, 26 turnovers for Michigan. An easy one to point to as kind of where that game went wrong. They were tied at half, down 3 going to the fourth, but just couldn't quite scrape it together. And Nebraska lost on the road at Georgia Tech, 72-61. Never able to get the deficit under 8 points in the second half. The first half, they shot 1 of 12 from the three-point line. That's one of the best three-point shooting teams in the country in Nebraska. So they fall as well. So a lot of marquee games for the Big Ten there. A lot of teams suffering some non-conference defeats. A team that has not suffered a single non-conference defeat is this week's Team of the Week, and that's the UCLA Bruins. And joining us now is the play-by-play voice of the UCLA Bruins, Dave Marcus. Dave, good morning to you out there on the West Coast. Thanks so much for joining us. It has to be a lot of fun to get a front row seat to watch this UCLA team so far. Let's start with Friday night. 26-4. Like, people had to look at their TV screens and adjust it to make sure that was right. 26-4. What did UCLA do so quickly to get ahead of Creighton like that?
Plain and simple, they executed the scouting report. They knew they had to run Creighton off the three-point line and not allow backdoor cuts. And I would say they did it to perfection. They had a 15-0 run in about a 2.5-minute span. The best basketball they played all year. It was really incredible.
Just a fantastic performance by UCLA in a game that's a Creighton team that UCLA played in the NCAA tournament. They know this Creighton team. They beat Nebraska earlier this season and just put that game away right away. Lauren Betts out in this game. She's dealing with the injury, but how'd you see some of the other players on this roster step in and kind of fill her void, which I know her void is not totally fillable, but obviously a lot of players having to step up and make that happen.
Well, when it became apparent that she was not going to play in the game, she missed the game before also, the Monday night game the Bruins played at home against Cal Poly. But Corey Close gathered the whole team around and said, next woman up. And that's the attitude they took. The Bruins are really long, even without Lauren Betts. Angela Dugalich, Janiyah Barker, Gabriela Jaquez, they are really mobile, long defenders, and they really did a great job of filling the void. You know, it was a fascinating game because Creighton took the Bruins to the wall in the NCAAs last year. 4-point win for UCLA. They trailed by 10 in the third quarter, and Creighton had 4 of their 5 starters back. And Keontae Lockett, who started in the 5th spot, had a great game against UCLA the other night. So they really learned from their past experience how to stop that Creighton team, which loves to rely on the three-pointers. They held Lauren Jensen, their leading scorer, to 2 of 15. It was really a great defensive effort by everybody.
Angela Dugalich with the double-double against Creighton in a really nice performance from her. She's put out a couple of those really good games this season. What has impressed you about her season thus far? Oh, do we lose you, Dave? Can you hear me? Oh, we might have internet issues here. Let's remove Dave and see if we can get it back here. Dave, can you hear me at all? You got me.
I don't know if we're back, Austin. I can see you, but you're frozen.
I'm frozen. Okay, that's good. Let's try and have you come back into the studio. We'll try and get him right back on here on the Dribble Drive. This is what we get live TV here. We'll see if he can jump back on, and we'll keep talking UCLA. Obviously a huge win for them, but there's been a lot too this season for UCLA. All right, Dave is back. Dave, I've got you in here. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, there we go. All right, this is what we get for live TV here. We're working through this thing. Okay, what were we talking about there?
We were talking about the defensive effort by UCLA in the absence of Lauren Betts. Corey Close told the team, next woman up, and they had a great defensive effort. Janiyah Barker, Angela Dugalich, Gabriela Jaquez, Kiki Rice, they're all great defenders. The Creighton team that the Bruins got a real hard game against in the tournament last year, only won by 4 points after trailing by 10 in the third quarter. UCLA ran them off the three-point line, stopped the backdoor cuts. They held Lauren Jensen, Creighton's leading scorer, to 2 for 15. It was a solid defensive effort, and although Lauren Betts is a player that's hard to replace, they did a really good job in her absence.
Angela Dugalich, somebody we should definitely point out. She had the double-double against Creighton. What's impressed you about the way she's played this season?
Well, she has so much confidence. Again, she played a couple games for Serbia in the Eurobasket qualifiers right after the Bruins played in Paris. She stayed in Europe and played a couple of games. And since she's come back, she's developed a knockdown three-point shot. And the last two games, she had 13 rebounds and 14 rebounds. She's just getting it done on the glass. Bruins a great rebounding team, but Angela has really stepped up her game.
Yeah, she's been terrific, and they really needed her in the absence of Lauren Betts. Kiki Rice missed a few games early in the season, now fully back in the fold, 20 points against Creighton. I would imagine that adds just a whole different element to the UCLA team when she's out there.
I think Kiki would like to play Creighton a lot. She had 24 in the tournament game last year. It's hard to imagine how well the Bruins played in her absence because she is such a key part of this team. She is fearless, driving the lane, absorbing contact. She makes the shots. She spins them off the glass. But I think we have to point out not only Kiki Rice, but the freshman, Elena Arnisalo, who started for the Bruins against Louisville and Paris and started back home against Colgate when Kiki Rice was out. And she has done an incredible job. I don't think the Bruins expected that they would go to a freshman point guard and not have a lot of drop-off in how the offense is running. Kiki Rice is great. She's a key part of the Bruins' attack. But Elena Arnisalo deserves a lot of credit, too.
I thought that Louisville game, going all the way back to game number 1, it was just a dominant performance by UCLA in the sense of like, it just felt like a 40-minute stiff arm of we're going to keep you at arm's length. We're going to keep putting baskets on. Every time Louisville seemed to have a chance at making a run, UCLA answered right back at them. And game 1, you never know what's going to happen. You're missing Kiki Rice. That was just so an impressive performance. Sum up that Paris game for us and what you learned right out of the gates from UCLA.
Well, it was interesting because that's really the only close game the Bruins have played. And it was a performance that I don't think was their best all around, but they did enough they fell behind a few times, but they did enough to pull away, and they ended up winning by 7. I think that gave them a lot of confidence going into the rest of the schedule. And that really manifested against South Carolina. I mean, that game was unbelievable. The Bruins have gotten off to really quick starts in all their games except that one. That game was 2-0 after 4.5 minutes. But then Chloe Kitts did a baseline drive for South Carolina, put up a pump fake, put up the shot, and Lauren Betts just roofed her. 2-hand block, went off Kitts, out of bounds. The Bruins went on a 10-0 run after that and never looked back. They dominated that game, and they've pretty much dominated every other game they played this year.
Yeah, that South Carolina game was certainly on my list of things we needed to talk about because that's one of, if not the best win that anybody has this season, snapping the very long win streak that South Carolina was on. And it was emphatic, like you said. What was working well for UCLA that day?
In a word, everything. I mean, the offense was great. The defense was great. They led by 10 after 1. They led by 21 at halftime. And although Tahina Paopao hit a few late threes to make the score a little more respectable, Bruins were ahead by 23, 24 points the whole game. They really did everything well. Dawn Staley was so classy after the game, and she just shook her head in the press conference and said, we ran into a buzzsaw today. And the challenge for the Bruins would be to keep that same effort going against the rest of the teams on their schedule. And they've pretty much done it. They've gotten out to very, very good starts. I mean, obviously 26-4 against Creighton is the best start they've had all year, but they've really been good at maintaining their focus. You know, going back to that Creighton game for a second, Austin, the Bruins got outscored in the second quarter, 19-16. And Corey Close had an animated conversation with the team at halftime about maintaining focus. And then they came out and they outscored Creighton, I think, by 10 in the third quarter. So they're very good at regrouping when they face a little temporary adversity now. And that's maybe something that they haven't done so well in the past. They're really doing it well this year.
Yeah, and it's a full resume. I mean, you look at we've talked about 3 games already that UCLA's won with Creighton, with Louisville, and South Carolina, but also opened Big Ten play with a road win at Washington, which road wins in conference we know are never easy, and that Washington team is a pesky bunch. And it kind of went up there and did the same thing they kind of did to Louisville, just kind of kept things at arm's length, really dominated the game. And I would imagine it felt weird. We talked to Eli Kleinman from USC a couple episodes ago about how weird it was to do a USC Oregon game and call it a Big Ten game. Had to have been a little weird for you to be doing a UCLA Washington and say this is a Big Ten conference game. But what were your takeaways from the opening conference win for UCLA?
I'm used to the Big Ten logo in the key at Pauley Pavilion now, so it didn't look that strange in Seattle. But it was interesting being in very familiar surroundings and seeing, you make a lot of friends when you go around conference. It was great saying hi to everybody up there. Washington always plays the Bruins tough, and Washington didn't play well in the first half. They started making a run in the second half. You'll see when you go up there, there's a player named Elle Ladine who plays for Washington, and she's like a volcano. She can be dormant for 3 quarters and then just go off. And she started going off, and Delia Daniels started having a good game. And again, that was one where the Bruins had to regroup and pull it back together. Ultimately, they prevailed. They allowed Washington 62 points. They haven't allowed anybody more than 63 points this year. Colgate got 63 on them in the second game. But they allowed South Carolina 62. They allowed Washington 62. And again, it was defense. It's a tough place to play. It's a small arena, really intense arena, a lot of noise, a lot of fun. But I thought the Bruins really responded well because Washington's a team that's going to beat some people this year.
Well, as we go through this episode, we're going to take a look. One of the things I'm going to do in the next segment is look at my preseason rankings in the Big Ten and compare them to what I think now. What are your thoughts on where UCLA sits now as compared to 2 months ago before the season started?
I'm obviously optimistic at the way they've started the year. I made a joking reference on the air in our first game that last year the Bruins started 14-0. I said, if the Bruins start 14-0 this year, that'll take us through New Year's Day with Michigan, knowing that South Carolina was on the schedule. But here they are 12-0. And I think they've got a pretty good shot to do well at home next weekend against Nebraska and a good Michigan team. Boy, those freshmen are fun to watch for Michigan. Yes. It's going to be very interesting when we get into the heart of the Big Ten travel schedule, because although the Bruins have been a lot of places, we've been to Hawaii, they've been to Paris, they've been up to San Francisco for the game Friday, they've been up to Seattle. The Midwest trips are going to be different, and it's going to be different, more difficult travel and cold, and some really good teams. The atmosphere when the Bruins visit Indiana on January 4 is going to be incredible. Indiana and Purdue on the first trip. So I'm really curious to see how the actual grind of Big Ten conference play works. The Bruins are in the best women's basketball conference in the country. You can't rest. You can't take a night off. And so far, they've been pretty good about not taking the night off. And we'll see what happens when we really get into the darker days of January and February on some of those long road trips.
If you do get to 14-0, you'll be coming to Bloomington with that record, which will certainly you and I will be excited to have that call here in Simon Scott Assembly Hall. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. We're looking forward to it. I think if you're trying to pick between USC and UCLA right now, you're picking at hairs right now to try and figure out who's better. That's 2 really good teams you guys got there in LA.
Well, we don't play each other until February 13. It's really interesting. We've always played SC as the first conference game in the Pac-12, and often the first and maybe the second conference games. But we don't play them until February 13. Then we play them at Pauley on the last day of the year, March 1st. So there's going to be a lot that happens between now and then.
There's going to be a lot of things to play for, I would imagine, when those games come around. Dave, enjoy the rest of your 2024, and we'll see you in the new year.
Austin, can't wait to see you at Simon Scott Assembly Hall.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Dave. That's the voice of the UCLA Bruins, Dave Marcus, joining us here on the Dribble Drive podcast as we continue to roll in here on episode 30. Let's turn our attention to where we sit right now in the conference. It is fascinating where we are at right now with this Big Ten, and just talking kind of right there. There's the two teams at the top seem to be the best. I think there's no doubt who those two are. But then after that, you got your Maryland, you got your Ohio State, and then it gets really interesting. And I think we talked about this when we talked with Dalton Shetler in the preview episode back in the offseason about where we ranked our teams in the preseason, how you could go 1, 2, 3, and then it got really interesting. I think right now it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's a giant crowd contending for spots 5 through 10, 11, 12, all the way down. So here's what I've got right now, and let's pull up this comparison. So on the left, if you're watching us on YouTube, you could see it. If you're in podcast form, I'll read it to you. But on the left is the preseason Big Ten poll. And actually, I should say that's my Big Ten preseason poll. It was only released 1 through 5 publicly. That's what I voted for. So you've got USC, UCLA 1 and 2, Ohio State 3. Then it was Maryland, Indiana, Nebraska 4, 5, 6, Iowa, Illinois, Michigan State at 7, 8, and 9. Here's how I would turn it around now if I were making it right now. I would put UCLA up at number 1 and USC down to number 2, flipping them. I don't necessarily know if that's how I'll do it in March. But as of right now, UCLA has earned itself that number 1 seed. And this is the number 1 talking point in sports right now is, do you want the best or do you want the most deserving? And I still, in my heart of hearts, think that USC is the most talented team in the country with Juju Watkins and Kiki Iriafe. But UCLA has earned that number 1 spot. They have beaten Louisville in Paris. They have beaten South Carolina, the only loss for the Gamecocks in the last 2 years. They have gone up and beaten Washington. They beat Creighton in San Francisco at a neutral site. They have earned themselves that ranking at number 1. And to me, they're number 1 right now in my power rankings. USC, a very close number 2. Ohio State, I think, deserves to be in that conversation with those two toward the top. I don't think there's that much space maybe that we thought preseason. I think preseason it was 1, 2, a bit of a jump to 3, and then a bigger jump to 4. Those jumps are tiny now. I think Ohio State has proven, sitting at 12-0 with wins over Illinois, a road win against Belmont, dominant win, a neutral site against Stanford, that they are the number 3 team and are much closer to those LA schools than maybe we thought in the preseason. And Maryland, same can be said about them. I still think there's a little bit more to be proven for Maryland. They had those early wins against Duke and Syracuse, but Syracuse hasn't been the same this year. The Duke win's really good early in the season. So can Maryland now, they went to Purdue in their opener. They struggled a little bit, but got the win. They're going to welcome Michigan State in this week, and that's a big opportunity for Maryland to prove, hey, we are a top 4 team in this conference, and we are going to control our home court. Because right behind them in my rankings now would be number 5, Michigan State. They are surging. They are coming off their first loss of the season, Alabama. I know that, but still 11-1, best start program history, 11-0 before that loss. They have proven that they are a top-tier team in this conference. They were last year. They got the bye in the Big Ten tournament, and they've proven this year that, hey, last year was not a fluke. This is the real deal. Grace Van Sluten's been a big addition. Julia Ayrault stepped up her game. Taryn Halleck has really stepped up her game. They're getting contributions around the floor from different players. And Michigan State up at number 4, or up at number 5, up 4 spots from where I had them in the preseason. Iowa and Illinois each jump up 1 spot from where they were preseason. Iowa 6, Illinois 7. But this is where I think Michigan State has earned the top of this class. But I think from Maryland to Michigan State, there is a bit of a gap, and that may be disproven this weekend when they play each other. But I think that this is where 5 through 10, 11, 12 is really tight. And Michigan State has earned that with the 11-0 start to be up at number 5. Iowa and Illinois, you're nitpicking to figure out who's better in between those two. Iowa has a win over Iowa State on its home floor that was really impressive. Illinois has that game 1 win over Florida State on its home floor that was very impressive. But they've both lost to good teams away from home. Illinois They lost to Ohio State on the road. Iowa lost neutral site to Tennessee. They also lost on the road to Michigan State. So you're nitpicking, trying to figure out who's better in those two. I give the edge to Iowa right now, but I think if those two were to play right now, it'd be a dead even, really fantastic basketball game. Indiana at number 8. I can see people already raising the pitchforks and saying, what are you doing with Indiana at 8? They've struggled out of the gates. Well, if you're still relying on the Indiana struggling out of the gates mantra and storyline, you're going to need to get a new storyline because they're playing much better basketball right now. And look, I see every one of their games. I understand that. I see it. But that's why I'm saying, trust me, I'm seeing better basketball right now from this team and the way they're playing. They, to me, can definitely get even higher than number 8 in this league right now. They were picked to finish 5th in the preseason. There's a reason for that. There's talent on this roster. So hopefully Indiana can keep playing some good basketball because they've won 5 straight. They've won 8 of their last 9. Their only loss was their 3rd game in 3 days in the Bahamas to a very good North Carolina team. Outside of that, they've controlled what they could control. They went on the road and beat Penn State. They've dominated some non-conference games. I know there's not a whole lot to take away from those. We'll learn, I think we're going to learn a lot about Indiana and their game against Wisconsin and vice versa. The Badgers are not on my list here, but they've had a great start, 10-2 this season. Sarah Williams is going to present a challenge Indiana hasn't seen this season, which is a really physical, dominant big. Next 2 games for Indiana is Wisconsin, UCLA. So they're going to see Sarah Williams and hopefully Lauren Betts if she's back from injury. And those are 2 dominant physical presences down low in the post. And this is, again, the first year without Mackenzie Holmes for Indiana. So how do Lily Meister and Caroline Strickland handle that 5 presence from both Williams and Betts? Will be fascinating to watch. Caroline Strickland, by the way, the Tennessee transfer for the Hoosiers, has scored 61 points in her last 3 games, had 27 points on the perfect shooting performance against Penn State a couple of weeks ago. So Indiana's bigs playing some good basketball will be tested against Sarah Williams, who just put up 28 and 12 in the win over UAlbany this week. Nebraska slides in at number 9 for me. Nebraska is another team like Indiana where I could see them getting higher in this list as the season goes on. But as of right now, they're still trying to figure out who they are without Natalie Potts, and that's totally fair because you take away an extremely important player to the way you're running things, probably the second best player on this team in Natalie Potts. And now you got to figure out, okay, what's the rotation look like? Where do the points come from? Where does the defense come from? And they're still figuring that out. Losses to Creighton and Georgia Tech, both away from home. They've been good at home in non-conference games, but even in some of those, haven't totally dominated the way that we would expect them to. So I'm not necessarily, and again, it's December 23rd. Keep that in mind. There's a long way to go. There's still 17 Big Ten games to be played here coming down the stretch. So these teams can certainly change their footing in these rankings, but that's where I have it. Michigan would be a very close 10. Again, you're nitpicking from Iowa all the way through Michigan at 6 through 10. Even Wisconsin and Minnesota, I'd say, with Oregon and Washington, all those teams. I mean, somebody has to be 13, 14. And it's hard. It's really hard right now. And we're going to get more data points into January and February. And we'll try and do these power rankings more often. Probably not weekly, but maybe weekly as we start to play more games. Certainly not next week. There'll only be 1 game. But I want to do these more often because it is nitpicking right now to figure out how much better is Indiana than Oregon. We have no idea, but we'll find out in late January when they play. How much better is Nebraska over Michigan? We have no idea, but they're going to play at some point. We're going to figure that out. So that's the beauty of this, is that we're going to get some more data points here coming up. That's where I see it at the moment. But again, Michigan fans, I understand there's an argument. I still think you're a tournament team. I think you're right there at number 10. And I think it's important to keep in mind the Big Ten this year. Charlie Cream has 12 Big Ten teams in his field right now. If you are 10 or 11 in the Big Ten standings this year, you are quite possibly a tournament team and maybe even a tournament lock. This is going to be a brutal Big Ten season because this conference is so good and so deep. It is going to be so hard to find wins in this conference consistently. So I'm fascinated to see how all of this kind of pans out. So that's where we stand with the power rankings here. I want to see if we can get an update maybe on a AP poll live here on the show for you. Doesn't look like we have it. We'll keep looking, see if we can find it. But as we continue to look through the rankings and power rankings, I felt like it was a fair time to try and see if we had some AP rankings. It's not like it's the end all be all. I'm just curious. Some of those teams toward the top. Okay, we do. All right. Fresh off the presses. Here we go. UCLA stays at number 1. South Carolina 2, Notre Dame 3. USC jumps 3 spots up to number 4. Texas rounds out the top 5. Maryland stays put at number 8. Ohio State's up 1 spot, now a top 10 team at number 10. Michigan State drops 4 after the loss to Alabama. They're at 19. Michigan hangs in there. They did lose to Oklahoma, but they dropped 3 spots and stay at number 23 in the rankings. And Iowa drops 2 spots. They had a tight win over Northern Iowa this week. They are number 24. Nebraska is the first team out. Also receiving votes, Illinois would be ranked number 29 if you were to extend it out. So Nebraska actually the only team that fell out of the top 25. They were replaced by, looks like Alabama jumped in after that win over Michigan State. So that's your AP poll. Let's take a look at what we got this week, because obviously we've got Christmas. It's going to be a great week holiday-wise. Hope you're spending it with family and friends. But we got an awesome weekend of Big Ten games for you. Here's the schedule on Saturday. If you're watching with us on YouTube, again, there's a visual. If you're listening in podcast form, you can always go back and watch the YouTube channel in post the live show. It's posted on the Back Home Network YouTube channel. Saturday, we've got 2 o'clock, Wisconsin at Indiana, a couple of 1-0 teams in the Big Ten. That's on the Big Ten Network. Washington at Northwestern at 3 o'clock. Also at 3 o'clock, Oregon at Illinois. Those are 4 teams still looking for their first Big Ten wins. And then at 4 o'clock on Big Ten Network, Penn State at Minnesota, a couple of teams also looking for their first wins of the conference season. So awesome slate there. No ranked teams in action in that slate, but there's some really intriguing games. The Oregon at Illinois, a couple of teams trying to find their footing in the conference. Same with Penn State, Minnesota, Wisconsin and Indiana trying to prove they belong in the upper half of the conference. Washington making their first trip out to the Midwest as they go to Evanston. So fascinating stuff there. Sunday, you got Michigan State at Maryland. That is our game of the week here on the Dribble Drive. We are extremely excited for that one. Michigan State 1-0. Maryland also 1-0 in the conference. Sunday, 1 o'clock. It's on Big Ten Plus. So do that or go listen to our guy Dalton Shetler. Not sure if Maryland will have a radio broadcast for that one. If they do, that's certainly another option as well. Brendan Hartlove would be the guy on the call there. That's at 1 o'clock on Big Ten Plus, Michigan State at Maryland. Huge game there to see where those two teams stack up. Ohio State hits the road, take on Rutgers at 2 o'clock. Purdue is at Iowa at 3 o'clock. 5 o'clock, Nebraska is at UCLA. Again, we just talked about it. Nebraska still trying to find its footing right now without Natalie Potts, and that's a tall task on the road at the number 1 team in the country. And then 10 o'clock, late night. Get used to this. We're going to have a lot of these late night games on the Big Ten Network. Michigan 1-0 at USC, also 1-0. 2 top 25 teams matching up there in LA. That's again Sunday night at 10 o'clock on the Big Ten Network. So a good slate of games on both Saturday and Sunday. And I'm not saying we're going to take the show on New Year's Eve and say, we've figured it out. We've got all the answers we need on these teams. But we are going to find some extra data points. I think like Michigan State going on the road. That's going to be a fascinating matchup. Nebraska and Michigan, can they hang with those top 5 teams in UCLA and USC on the road? They're the first teams to make that trip out to LA. How does Ohio State handle a road trip against the pesky Rutgers team in a spot that's never easy to play? So fascinating data points to be gained by these teams this week, and it should be an awesome Big Ten schedule. And hopefully we're having some Christmas leftovers Saturday and Sunday and watching some good women's basketball. Well, big thank you to Dave Marcus for joining us just a moment ago talking UCLA. Before we go, let's talk about a couple of things that happened this week in the Big Ten that are definitely worth shouting out. Cheyenne Sellers up to a top 25 scorer in Maryland women's basketball history. That, of course, is an illustrious history. She's also 7th in career assists. Kendall Bostic for Illinois is now tied for 2nd in Illini history with 42 double-doubles. She's got 8 this year. 1,129 career rebounds for her as well, is 88 behind Jenna Smith, who finished her career in 2010 for the Illini for the all-time record. I would imagine Kendall Bostic will not have any issues securing 88 more rebounds this season. She, in her most recent game, another double-double for her, 14 points and 15 rebounds. Some other performances we should shout out. Alexis Markowski, a double-double in the loss at Georgia Tech, 20 points, 10 rebounds. Melanie Daly for Northwestern, who went 2-1 this week, 16 points per game for Daly, double figures in all 3 games. Overtime win over UNLV, tight win over Howard, and a tight loss to Charleston for Northwestern. Reagan Bass had a pair of double-doubles for Purdue this week. Kaomi McMiller is our freshman of the week, but again, I said this last time, we have to start throwing her in the player of the week category. 31 points in a come-from-behind win over Lafayette for Rutgers. And then Sierra Williams, 28 points and 12 rebounds in a win over UAlbany. But again, Kaomi McMiller is the freshman of the week from Rutgers. Other freshman performances, Mila Holloway had 20 points in the loss to Oklahoma. And Tori McKinney with 17 points for Minnesota in the win over Prairie View A&M. Final news and notes. Iowa, with that win over Northern Iowa, keeps their streak alive of not losing back-to-back games in over 2 full seasons. December 1st of 2022, the last time they lost back-to-back games. And Peyton Scott of Oregon scored her 2,000th career point in Oregon's win this week. They actually had a couple of wins this week. They beat Air Force and UC Irvine for the Ducks, who now turn, like everyone else does, to Big Ten play this weekend. Again, thank you to Dave Marcus for joining us. Thank you all who have watched us live on the YouTube channel. Again, we're going to move back to Tuesdays at noon, a nice lunch break for those on the East Coast, maybe a nice morning opportunity for you to join our stream on the West Coast. Feel free when you do join those streams, and I should say this at the top of the episode, not the bottom, but leave us a comment, ask us questions. We want audience involvement. Tweet at us at Dribble Drive WBB. Give us a follow there. You can also tweet at me as well at Austin Render on Twitter. We love to have audience participation and start talking about teams. Maybe we're missing something. So certainly there's 18 teams, 18 times 5 just in starters alone. That's a lot of people we got to keep track of. That's 90 starters across the conference and plenty more role players that are certainly worth talking about. So help us out. If you got questions, comments, leave them in the chat live. We appreciate that. Download our episodes, subscribe to the YouTube channel, the Back Home Network. Give us a rating on Apple and Spotify. That stuff helps us out as well. Well, we will be back with you next Tuesday. That's New Year's Eve on December 31st, a noon drop for that one, as we will have plenty of Big Ten basketball to recap from this first official resumption of play in the Big Ten season. Thanks so much for joining us, whether that was over the podcast or on the YouTube channel live or in the spending some time with us. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Hope you enjoy it with some friends and family. Hope this podcast maybe helped you get through some of the drive or the flight that you had. We'll talk to you guys next week. Enjoy some basketball.